Last week, we established that social difference in virtual spaces is structural. It runs through design ideology, industrial demographics, cultural history, and community practices simultaneously. What we did not yet have was a theoretical vocabulary for that structure, a set of concepts that could let us describe precisely how advantage accumulates, how it moves between forms, and why inequality persists even in spaces that were explicitly designed to offer everyone an equal start. So that's what Pierre Bourdieu is going to give us. Bourdieu is a dense writer, and his paper this week can be hard-going on a first read. Do not worry if not every sentence clicks immediately. What I want to do here is give the core ideas in a way that makes them useful, because once they click, they're genuinely illuminating tools for understanding social life in and around games. The starting point is deceptively simple. Bourdieu says the social world is accumulated history. It's not a series of random encounters between interchangeable individuals. It has a structure. It has inertia. Past effort shapes present position, and present position shapes future chances. To understand how this works, we need to reintroduce the concept of capital, and not just in the narrow economic sense of money and property. Capital for Bourdieu is accumulated labour in any form. It is what you have built up over time, whether that is money or skills or connections or credentials or cultural fluency. And because it takes time to accumulate and has a tendency to persist and reproduce itself, capital is what prevents social life from becoming like roulette, a game of pure chance in which every spin is independent of the last and anyone can win anything at any moment. Capital is what makes social outcomes predictable. It is why the child of a doctor is statistically more likely to become a doctor rather than the child of a labourer. It is why the person who grew up surrounded by books finds university more comfortable than the person who did not. It is why, as we saw last week, the person with a lifetime of gaming experience moves through an online space like fish in water. Bourdieu identifies three primary forms of capital, each with its own logic. Economic capital is the most familiar. Money, property, financial assets. It is directly convertible into money and can be institutionalized as property rights. Everything else, Bourdieu says, ultimately has economic capital as its root, even when it is concealed its economic origins. Cultural capital exists in three states. In its embodied state, it is the dispositions, skills, and ways of being that are inscribed in the body and mind through sustained investment in time. The habits of thought and action that you build up through practice and cannot simply hand to somebody else. You cannot give another person the years you've spent developing a skill. They have to do that work themselves. In its objectified state, cultural capital takes the form of material goods. Books, instruments, artworks, equipment, things that could be transferred economically, but whose use requires the embodied cultural capital to unlock them. I can give you a guitar, but I cannot give you the ability to play it. And in its institutionalized state, which is the third state of cultural capital becomes formal credentials, degrees, certificates, official recognitions that convert a person's competence into a socially guaranteed, legally recognized form. The degree tells the world that this person's cultural capital has been assessed and certified. And social capital, as opposed to economic or cultural, is the resources available to an individual by virtue of their membership in a durable network of relationships. It's all about who you know. But more than that, it's the collectively owned capital of the group that each member can draw on, the reputation of your guild, the backing of your community, the trust that comes from being known as a member of a particular network. Bourdieu describes this as having a multiplier effect. Belonging to a prestigious or powerful network amplifies the effectiveness of all the other capital you possess. Beyond these three, Bourdieu introduces the crucial concept of symbolic capital, which is not a separate type, but what any form of capital becomes when it is misrecognized. When economic capital is not seen as economic but as natural intelligence. When social capital is not seen as nepotism but as deserved reputation. Or when cultural capital is not seen as the product of privileged access but as innate talent. Symbolic capital is power made invisible to itself, the mechanism by which advantage reproduces itself while appearing to be merit. It is what makes inequality feel legitimate to those who benefit from it, and often painfully to those who are disadvantaged by it. There is a connection here to the magic circle that is worthwhile to make explicit. Huizinga's magic circle works by presenting the temporary, bounded world of the game as something set apart from the rest of social life, as if entering the circle involved a genuine suspension of the world's usual hierarchies and stakes. Symbolic capital operates by the same misrecognition at a social scale. Economic advantage is misrecognized as intelligence. Accumulated social connections are misrecognized as deserved reputation. The habitus that comes from a lifetime of access is misrecognized as natural talent. Both the magic circle and symbolic capital produce their effects by making their own conditions of possibility invisible. When we said in week 2 that the magic circle leaks, that social life floods through its walls, what Bourdieu allows us to add is that what leaks, specifically, is capital in all its forms, and that the mechanism preventing people from seeing it is misrecognition. So finally, let's turn to fields and habitus with Bourdieu. A field is a structured social space with its own rules of functioning, not a neutral arena, but a site of competition in which agents deploy their capital as weapons and stakes. What counts as capital in one field does not automatically translate to another. Extraordinary skill in StarCraft does not make you a stockbroker, unless there is an institutional structure like esports that allows that translation to happen. Each field has its own logic, its own hierarchy, its own definition of what constitutes legitimate competence. And habitus is a set of durable dispositions the successful participation in a field requires. A practical sense of the game, a feel for what to do and how to do it that is not calculated or explicit, but embodied, intuitive, and the result of long-term immersion. The player with habitus for a particular field moves through it, as Bourdieu says, like a fish in water. They do not notice the rules because the rules have become second nature. The player without that habitus finds the same field opaque, hostile, and exhausting. We've already met this idea, though under a different name. When Dovey and Kennedy described the transition from the controller being present at hand to ready at hand, or when Bayliss described the 3 layers of the interface collapsing into seamless flow, or even when Leahy described corporealized pleasures, they were all describing something structurally identical to habitus. Technicity is embodied cultural capital. Bourdieu's vocabulary allows us to connect the phenomenological account of week 4 to the social and economic question of how that embodied competence is distributed, articulated, and converted into advantage. The body in the loop is also a body in a field. So let's put these concepts to work through the 4 empirical readings, because this is where Bourdieu stops being abstract and we can start seeing him as useful. So when Mikael Jakobsson first entered EverQuest, he had the same expectations most new players have. He would grind, improve his character, and eventually learn recognition through individual effort and skill. The game manual encouraged this image. It described EverQuest as a world of lone brave explorers perfecting their abilities. What Jakobsson found when he actually started playing, guided by his co-author T.L. Taylor, who was already a veteran, was something quite different. Social networks were not just a feature of the game, they were the primary currency of the game. Your reputation mattered more than your stats. Who you knew was at least as important as what your character could do. Being introduced as a real-life friend, rather than just a friend in the game, carried immediate weight. It signalled that you could be trusted, that your social capital had been vouched for by someone already in the network. The concept Jakobsson and Taylor reach for is the Sopranos analogy. The mafia, as it appears in popular culture, is a social organisation built entirely on social capital. Trust, honour, reputation, the ability to call in favours, the backing of the family. In EverQuest, they argue, something structurally similar operates. The community enforces its own norms in the absence of effective official enforcement. When Frank, an Ixar lizard person, pulled the modem cable after taking a valuable item, no game master arrived to adjudicate. What happened instead was that Frank's reputation was instantly and permanently destroyed in that corner of the game world. Social capital, once lost, is not easily recovered. And the concept of twinking is especially Bourdieuian. High-level players giving powerful items to new characters. This is objectified cultural capital. Gear, equipment, resources being transferred through social connections rather than earned through play. What it means in Bourdieu's term is the conversion of social capital, your relationship with the high-level player, into objectified cultural capital in the form of items, which in turn accelerates the accumulation of embodied cultural capital in the form of skill and level, which otherwise would take much longer to build. The social network is not just nice to have, it's an asset that can be converted into other assets, shortcutting the time normally required for accumulation. Jakobsson and Taylor's punchline, friends are the ultimate exploit, lands with its full weight when considered in Bourdieuian terms. An exploit is a mechanism that lets you bypass the designed rules of the game to gain disproportionate advantage. Friendship is the ultimate exploit because social capital is the most powerful accelerant in the whole economy of EverQuest. The game presents itself as a meritocracy of skill and effort. What it actually rewards, above all, is who you know. So let's move on to Florence Chee's ethnography of Korean PC bangs, which gives us a different angle on the same dynamic, though now refracted through the concept of wang-tta, a Korean social practice of systematic ostracism, the collective singling out of one person to bully and exclude. In the context of PC bangs as third places, spaces that are neither home nor work but serve as crucial sites of social life for Korean youth, wang-tta operates as something like the maximum penalty of the field. To become wang-tta is to lose not just your status but your access to the social world of your peers altogether. It is social death. Chee shows that gaming skill in this context functions as embodied cultural capital with direct social stakes. Players who fall behind in skill face exclusion. Players who excel earn respect and social standing. This is why many players practice privately at home before going to the PC bang. Not because practice is inherently enjoyable in isolation, but because arriving at the bang without sufficient competence means being exposed as lacking the capital the field requires. The labour of inculcation, as Bourdieu calls it, happens in private so that its products can be displayed in public. What makes Chee's account Bourdieuian in a particularly sharp way is the social function of the field itself. The PC bang is not just a place where you play games. It is a site of competition for social standing in which gaming skill, social membership and economic access are all entangled. The field's imminent regularities, its internal rules about what counts as legitimate competence, are not the rules of the game. They are the social rules of the bang. And the consequence of failing to meet those standards is not merely that you play badly, it is that you cease to belong. Okay, so let's now consider another paper. Wayne Marshall's paper on Fortnite dances and the politics of cultural appropriation is probably the most complex of this week's readings, and it's where Bourdieu's concept of symbolic capital and misrecognition does the most interesting work. The argument begins with a historical observation. The dances that have become Fortnite emotes, the floss, the hype, the Millie Rock, the default dance, are not inventions of Epic Games. They are creations of black social dance culture, rooted in what Marshall, following Katrina Hazard Gordon, calls the Duke Continuum, a long tradition of African American vernacular dance that runs through juke joints, church dances, hip-hop and contemporary Atlanta trap culture. The specific form that drove the current craze, the 4-count signature move structure that makes dances teachable, shareable and scalable across platforms, was developed over a decade by black youth in Atlanta, Georgia, building the aesthetic vocabulary that social media then amplified globally. These dances are embodied cultural capital in Bourdieu's most literal sense. They are skills developed and sustained through communal labour, inscribed in the body through practice and social participation. They carry social meaning with the communities that created them, marking belonging, virtuosity and cultural fluency. What Epic Games did was convert this embodied cultural capital into objectified cultural capital. The living social dance, rooted in specific communities and histories, was captured, looped, decontextualized, rebranded and sold as an emote in a marketplace. The Millie Rock became the swipe. Donald Glover's Running Man became the default dance. The social relations that produced these dances, the communities, the scenes, the individual creators, were erased from the transaction. This is where misrecognition operates at a systemic level. By presenting these dances as simply Fortnite emotes, as digital goods with no cultural origin worth naming, Epic ensures that when players use them, they are not engaging with black cultural production. They're just using a purchasable in-game gesture. The accumulated labour that created the dance is misrecognised as mere content, available for corporate enclosure and sale. The symbolic capital that the original creators and their communities possessed, the authority, the cultural fluency, the distinctiveness of their practice, is appropriated along with the movement itself, with no compensation, credit or acknowledgement. The lawsuits against Epic by individual creators like Millie, Blockboy JB and the Carlton creator are, in Bourdieuian terms, a struggle over the right to define what constitutes legitimate ownership of cultural capital in this field. They are an attempt to make the economic origins of what appear as symbolic capital visible again, to insist that these dances are not natural goods, but products of specific labours by specific people who deserve the profits of distinction and their creations generate. And now the fourth paper, Akil Fletcher's The Magic Circle of Whiteness. Akil Fletcher's paper takes the analysis to a different register, asking not about gender or skill but about race, and specifically about how whiteness functions as a form of capital in online gaming spaces. Fletcher introduces the concept of the magic circle of whiteness, building on Heisinger's notion that games exist as bounded spaces with their own rules. His argument is that in online gaming, the boundaries of the space are not just set by the rules of the game, but by the cultural logics of a white hegemony. The MCW is not maintained primarily through overt racism, though that is certainly present, but through a pervasive centering of whiteness as the default, the norm, the unmarked position, against which blackness is defined as other, intrusive and illegitimate. In Bourdieuian terms, whiteness in this field functions as symbolic capital. It is not experienced as capital, it is experienced as simply being normal, unremarkable, the background condition of participation. Its power lies precisely in its misrecognition. What is actually a form of accumulated social and cultural advantage conferred by the historical centering of white identity in gaming culture appears as simple neutrality. To be white in these spaces is to move through them without friction, without your presence being questioned, without your right to be there requiring legitimation. Fletcher's account of black people discord is a particularly vivid illustration. Gold creates a black community space with genuine care and ingenuity. A levelling system designed to build trust, multiple channels for different interests, an explicit commitment to black community. The space grows, but its public accessibility makes it vulnerable. It is attacked, infiltrated, gradually transformed. White members join seeking the pleasure of black social life without being required to reckon with the politics of it. The moderation structure, designed to be fair and to prevent the kind of arbitrary exclusion gold has experienced elsewhere, ends up producing a situation in which the most active moderator is white, and when gold leaves, the group passes into white ownership overnight. This is not a story about individual bad actors. Babatunde is by all accounts well-meaning. It is a story about how the structural conditions of the field, the MCW, which makes black space legible as open space to non-black participants seeking play and pleasure, operate independently of individual intentions. The capacity to extract pleasure from black cultural space without accountability, without reciprocity, and without the acknowledgement of what that space costs to maintain, this is the operation of symbolic capital at the structural level. Fletcher's counterweight to this is the black spoil sport, represented by groups like Black Girl Gamers, who find ways to maintain black space and black joy in conditions structurally hostile to both. Like Heisinger's spoil sport, who refuses the rules of the game, the black spoil sport refuses the logic of the magic circle of whiteness, not by leaving the field, but by establishing within it spaces that operate according to different rules, offering their members what Fletcher calls black joy, the pleasure of belonging to a community that centres rather than marginalising their identity. So what all four of these readings demonstrate, read through Bourdieu, is that virtual spaces are not neutral arenas where individual effort and skill determine outcomes. They are fields, structured social spaces in which different forms of capital are in constant circulation, conversion, and competition. Social capital, friends, networks, or guild membership, converts into competitive advantage through twinking and collective resources. Embodied cultural capital, in the form of skill, technicity, or gaming fluency, determines who moves through the field like a fish in water and who is perpetually present at hand. Objectified cultural capital, in the form of equipment, rare items, or emotes, can be acquired through economic capital or earned through play, and symbolic capital, the misrecognized form of all of these advantages, makes the whole system feel like meritocracy, like natural competence, like people simply getting what they deserve. The power of the Bourdieuian framework is that it lets you see both why difference persists. Capital accumulates, reproduces itself, and confers structural advantage before any individual encounter, and why it is invisible. The operation of capital is most effective when its origins are misrecognized, when it looks like talent or effort rather than inherited position. Before we finish, let's notice that the boundary question has taken a new form. Capital for Bourdieu does not respect the boundary between the virtual and the real. Social capital converts into objectified cultural capital through twinking. Embodied capital converts into social death through wang-tta. The living embodied cultural capital of the Duke continuum gets enclosed, repackaged, and sold as a digital emote. Whiteness moves from offline social world into online gaming space and back again without friction. What the Bourdieuian framework allows us to say precisely is that the boundary between game and the rest of life is porous because capital is porous, and capital does not stop being capital when it crosses the line. That observation is where next week begins. If capital circulates freely between the virtual and the real, then virtual economies are real economies. And if virtual economies are real economies, then the people producing value within them are doing real work. The play work question, which we seeded in week 1 and named as ludocapitalism in week 2, deferred while we built up the necessary vocabulary, but it's about to receive its most direct confrontation. This is the framework you'll be working with for your position paper this week. The best papers will not simply apply the concepts mechanically, but will use them to reveal something surprising about how capital operates in virtual environments, something that the framework illuminates that you could not have seen without it. Good luck, and as always, come to office hours or email me if you have any questions.